The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
Please welcome Dr. Ben Carson, Liberty University.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Candy and I are absolutely delighted to be here with you today, and that's Candy right over there. Candy, can you stand up so they can see you? No, it's been a few years since I've been at Liberty, but we talk about liberty all the time because that's what it represents. Liberty, freedom from the snares of the world, and the right kind of teaching and the right kind of values for the young people who will become the leaders of our nation. And you're such a vital part of the future of this nation. But you know, I do want to acknowledge today as Veterans Day because I really feel that we don't do enough for our veterans. When you consider what they did for us, you know, I think about World War II, and I think about those soldiers invading the beach at Normandy, being mowed down by machine gun fire. 100 bodies laying in the sand, 1,000 bodies laying in the sand. But did our soldiers turn back? No. Were they frightened? Yes. But did they turn back? No. They stepped over the bodies of their dead colleagues, and they overwhelmed the Axis forces, knowing in many cases that they would never see their loved ones or their homeland again. And why would they do such a thing? Not for themselves, but for you and me, so that we could be free, so that we could have a land of prosperity. And now the question is, what are we willing to do for those who come behind us? And I just want to thank everybody who's a veteran. Do we have any veterans? Can they stand up, please? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Such a sacrifice, and something that we all must begin to think about in our lives. Because there is nothing that is really free, and particularly the concept of freedom. But you know, we should be so delighted that we live in America. Is there a better place to live than America? I don't think so. I've been to 57 countries, and some of them are beautiful places, but I'm always delighted to get back here because there's something special about the nation that we live in. Have you ever noticed that there's an American way? There's an American dream. There's no French dream. There's no Canadian dream. There's, you know. There really is only an American dream. And what that means is that there's something special and something extremely unique about the nation that we live in, and the values that went into making this nation what it is. And some people say, there's nothing exceptional about America. We're just the same as everybody else. It's not true. For hundreds of years, even thousands of years before America came on the scene, people did things the same way. Within 200 years of the advent of America, men were walking on the moon. It's the most exceptional nation the world has ever known, and we are likely to be here. Having said that, it's the land of dreams. And the dream for me, as for some of you with your white coats on, was to be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor, I loved anything that had to do with medicine. I even liked going to the doctor's office. I would gladly sacrifice a shot just so I could smell those alcohol swabs, it was great. But the problem was, I wasn't that great a student. In fact, I was a horrible student. And everybody called me Dummy. That was my nickname. And I believed it too. I didn't think I was very smart. And I remember once we were having an argument in the schoolyard about who was the dumbest kid in the class. It wasn't a big argument because they all agreed it was me, but then someone had to extend the argument to who was the dumbest person in the world. And I said, wait a minute. There are billions of people in the world. And they said, yep, and you're the dumbest one. So but, I did admire the smart kids. And I couldn't even imagine how they could know so much. But there was one person who didn't think that I was dumb, and that was my mother. She always thought that there was something there. And she would always say, Benjamin, you're much too smart to bring home grades like this. I brought them home anyway, but she was always saying that. And she just didn't know what to do, and she prayed, and she asked God for wisdom to know what to do to get her sons to understand the importance of intellectual development. And you know what? God gave her the wisdom, at least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was wise at all. Turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom is that? Making us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And she would put check marks and highlights and underlines, and we would think she was reading them, but she wasn't. And, people are always saying to me, why did you do it? Your mother was always working. She wouldn't have known whether you read the books or not. Yes, she would have. And back in those days, you had to do what your parents told you. There was no social psychologist saying, let the kid express themselves, So, and as I read those books, incredible things began to happen. I began to realize, particularly as I read about people of accomplishment in all kinds of fields, that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. It's not the environment. And that was incredibly empowering to me. And I stopped listening to all the people around me, all the naysayers who talked about what couldn't be done. And I started thinking about what could be done and what a difference it made in my life. And fast forward to medical school. I said, wow, I made it. I finally got there. My only dream was to be a doctor. I skipped right over firemen and policemen. Went right to doctor. And there I was finally in medical school, and it was going to be great, except the first set of comprehensive exams. And I did terribly. And I was sent to see my counselor, and he looked at my record. He said, you seem like a very intelligent young man. I bet there are a lot of things you could do outside of medicine. And he said I should drop out of medical school. He says, you weren't cut out to be a doctor. I was devastated. I went back to my apartment. I said, Lord, I always thought you wanted me to be a doctor, but it's not looking very good here. And I started praying for wisdom. And I started thinking about what was happening with me. And I was going to a lot of classes, but I wasn't really learning anything from the classes. And I thought back academically, I said, the thing that really teaches you a lot is reading. So I made an executive decision, and I'm not recommending this to anybody, but I made an executive decision to skip the boring lectures and to spend that time reading. And the rest of medical school was a snap after that. And, you know, the point there being that everybody learns in a different way. I personally don't learn anything from boring lectures, but I learn a lot from reading. Now, there are other people who learn a great deal from boring lectures, and that's how they learn. Other people, you know, they learn from discussions. Some people learn from repetition. Some people are very visual. One of the other things I discovered is that, you know, I was very visual, so I made flashcards for everything that I needed to know. I had literally thousands of flashcards. I always had a bunch of flashcards in my pocket. I remember my second year of medical school, I was living with my brother who was in the School of Engineering. He even knew all the bacteria and what they were sensitive to, because I always had these cards out, you know, talking about it. So, you know, you find out, you know, what works for you, and that's an incredibly important part of what you do and what we do as a society. Because God has endowed us with these amazing brains, and we're made in the image of God. And you know, I get a lot of grief out there. People say, how can you be a scientist and believe that God created the earth? You know, obviously, you know, we developed from a puddle of promiscuous biochemicals. And if you believe anything other than that, you're a moron. And, you know, I don't criticize them. I say, can you tell me how something came from nothing? And of course, they can't. They say, well, we don't understand everything. I say, okay, no problem. I say, I'm just going to give you that there's something. Okay. And now you're going to tell me there's a big bang and it comes into perfect order so that we could predict 70 years hence when a comet is coming, that kind of precision. And they say, well, yeah. And I said, but don't you also believe in entropy, that things move toward a state of disorganization? Well, yeah. So how does that work? And they say, well, we don't understand everything. And I said, I'm not sure you understand anything, but but I say, I'm not going to be critical of you. Not a problem. Because you're entitled to believe what you believe, even though it requires a lot more faith than what I believe. But everybody believe what you want to believe. And, you know, isn't that part of the problem with our society today? People want to force their beliefs on everybody else. I believe that the Constitution gives everybody the same rights, but it doesn't give anybody extra rights. And that's where the problem comes in. And if we can begin to understand that, and we can begin to listen to that, then I believe that we can make real progress, because that would mean that people, whether they believe the same or not, could actually sit down and engage in an intelligent conversation and put the reasons that they believe what they believe on the table. Because when you live in a pluralistic society, it is absolutely crucial that we learn how to do that. It's also very vital that we begin to think about each other. We begin to think about those who come behind us. You know, when I look out there and I see all of these young people, you know, I think back to Thomas Jefferson, who said that it is immoral to pass debt on to the next generation. And when I think about what my generation is passing on to you guys, I mean, if we could bring Thomas Jefferson here today and let him see what's going on, he would immediately stroke out. I mean, he would not be able to believe the kind of debt that we are leaving there. I mean, $18+ trillion of national debt? Think about that. I mean, if you tried to pay that off at a rate of $10 million a day, it would take you over 5,000 years. And we're putting that on your backs. But that's the good news, because it's actually much worse than that. The fiscal gap, which is the amount of money that the government owes going forward, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all the government agencies and programs, what we owe for that, versus what we expect to bring in from taxes and other revenue sources. If we were responsible, of course, those numbers would be almost identical. If you're not responsible, a gap develops there. Bring it up to today's dollars, it's called a fiscal gap. It sits at over $200 trillion. Somebody has to be responsible for that. And the only reason we can sustain that level of debt is because we can print money, because we're the reserve currency of the world. A position that generally goes with the #1 economy in the world, which we have been since the 1870s. Now we're in competition with China for it, but we still have the title. Would China like to be the reserve currency? Would they like to be able to print money? You bet they would. And they're working very hard with the Asian International Investment Bank, and I don't know how many years it will be. We have a little reprieve. We have a little time to get our house in order, but not a lot of time, because the financial situation is very precarious if we don't do something about it soon, and it collapses. What happened in 1929 on Wall Street will be a walk in the park compared to what will happen. Fiscal responsibility. It is our duty. And we can fix these kinds of things. It is possible to get our economy rolling again. We have the most powerful economic engine the world has ever known in this country. Nothing anywhere close to it. We declared our independence in 1776. In less than 100 years, we're the #1 economic power, because we had the right kind of atmosphere that encouraged innovation and entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment and all the things that fueled our rapid rise. Guess what? Those are exactly the same things that will fuel a rapid recovery if we're willing to look at them and stop doing silly stuff. You know, silly things like putting a gazillion regulations around everything so that it's very difficult for people to start a business. Things like, you know, you think of things like an employer mandate. Now, here you have a situation where people used to be so proud when they started a business, and they would call their mother, and they would say, "Mom, I started a business. I got 10 employees." And then the next year they had 20, then 30, and then 40, and now you get to 40 and you say, "Oh, better stop. Don't want to hit 50 and have that employer mandate kicked in." Well, that was the very backbone of America, the growth of small business. And we put something in there to stop small business from growing, and then we wonder why jobs aren't coming. And that's why it's so important for people to actually understand what's going on in this country. If you listened to the news last week, you saw a lot of people rejoicing that the unemployment rate is down to 5%. You know, that's essentially full employment. But if you know anything at all about economics, you know that you can make that number anything you want it to be based on who you include and who you exclude, and that the real number is the labor force participation rate, which is at its lowest level since in 38 years. And that's why the founders of this nation said that our freedom and our system is based upon a well-informed and educated populace. And if they ever become anything other than that, the nature of the country will change. Because if the people are not well informed, all it takes is unscrupulous politicians and news media, and off the people go in a completely wrong direction, listening to all kinds of propaganda and inculcating that into their method of thinking. And then it becomes real easy for them to swallow things. If they don't really understand the financial situation of the country, and somebody comes along and says, free college for everybody, they'll say, oh, what a wonderful person. And they have no idea that all you're talking about is hastening the destruction of the nation. Well, I could talk about the economy for a long time, but let me just say before we start the Q&A, this nation is an incredibly special place, because when you look at our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, it talks about certain unalienable rights given to us by our Creator, also known as God. And we have so many people now who are trying to push God out of our lives. And they take the Word of God and they try to negate it and make it seem like if you believe in anything that's there, that you're some kind of an idiot. Well, let me tell you, our nation's survival as the pinnacle nation in the world, I believe, is rooted in our value system, the values and principles that made us into a great nation. And the real question is, are we willing to stand up for those values and principles, or will we allow ourselves to be intimidated by the secular progressives? The secular progressives don't care whether you agree with them or not, as long as you sit down and keep your mouth shut. And I think that the secret to the prosperity in this nation is we must be willing to stand up for what we believe in. Thank you.